Okay, so we're diving into some pretty important stuff today. Uh, the role of inspectors general in the U.S. government, IGs.
Yeah, these are really the folks that kind of keep things running honestly and ethically in the government.
Right, and this all kind of came to my attention from this really interesting YouTube video I saw with a former IG talking about their experiences and some pretty shocking allegations about what's been going on.
Oh yeah, there've been some pretty big controversies around IGs in recent years.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so our goal for today is to sort of break down what IGs actually do, why they're so important to a functioning government, and what happens when that system gets disrupted or potentially even undermined.
Yeah, it really gets to the heart of accountability and transparency in government.
Okay, so first things first, can you give us the basic definition of an inspector general? We hear that term thrown around, but what does it really mean in the context of the U.S. government?
Well, you can think of them as like internal watchdogs within federal agencies. They're kind of like the eyes and ears of the American people, making sure that things are running smoothly and honestly.
So they're not part of the regular chain of command within an agency.
That's right. They're independent, and that's really crucial to their role because it allows them to investigate potential wrongdoing without fear of reprisal or interference from the agency leadership.
And that independence extends to political parties as well, right? I mean, they're not supposed to be beholden to a particular administration or political agenda.
Absolutely. Their loyalty is to the Constitution and to the principles of good governance, not to any one person or party. Their job is to uphold the law, regardless of who's in power.
Okay, so what does that job actually entail? What are the main things that an IG does on a day-to-day basis?
Well, their responsibilities are kind of twofold, first and foremost. They conduct investigations into allegations of fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption within their assigned agency. So they're like detectives looking for any signs of wrongdoing.
Right, so they're the ones who would look into things like misuse of government funds or conflicts of interest.
Exactly. And their investigations can be really far-reaching. They can subpoena witnesses, gather evidence, and issue reports on their findings.
So it's a pretty serious role with a lot of power.
It is. And the other major part of their work is auditing. So they'll go through an agency's financial records, their IT systems, their programs and policies, and basically make sure that everything is in order and compliant with the law.
So they're looking for inefficiencies, potential vulnerabilities, places where things could go wrong.
Precisely. And their audits can help agencies improve their operations, save taxpayer money, and prevent problems before they arise.
Especially in today's world, with cybersecurity being such a major concern, that IT audit function sounds incredibly important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, government agencies hold so much sensitive data, everything from personal information to national security secrets. So making sure those systems are secure is absolutely paramount.
Okay, so we've got this sense of what IGs are and what they do, but this all leads to a really significant event that happened a few years back during the Trump administration, the alleged unlawful firing of 17 inspectors general.
Yeah, that was a huge story, and it really sent shockwaves through the government accountability community.
Right, so the video I mentioned, that's what really prompted this deep dive. It talked about those firings happening on Friday, January 24th, and the initial reaction was, I mean, just disbelief and outrage.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about removing the watchdogs, the people who are supposed to be holding the government accountable. It raised a lot of red flags immediately.
It almost reminded me of that line from Shakespeare, you know, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers.
Yeah.
Obviously not a literal endorsement of lawlessness,
Yeah.
but it kind of speaks to this idea of getting rid of the checks and balances that keep power in check.
And IGs, they are definitely a form of check and balance within the government. They're there to ensure that agencies are operating ethically and legally.
So what was the legal basis for calling these firings unlawful? What were the specific violations that were being alleged?
Well, there are a couple of main issues. The biggest one was that the Inspector General Act of 1978 lays out very specific requirements for removing an IG, and those requirements were seemingly ignored.
Oh, so there's an actual law governing how this is supposed to work?
Absolutely. It's not something that can be done arbitrarily, and the law is very clear on that point.
Okay, so what does the law say? What are the steps that have to be taken?
Well, first of all, the president does have the authority to remove an IG, but they have to give Congress 30 days advance written notice of their intent to do so.
Oh, so they can't just fire them on the spot?
Nope. There's a whole process that has to be followed. And secondly, and this is really crucial, the president has to provide Congress with a detailed written explanation of the reasons for the removal.
So it can't just be, I don't like this person or I want to put my own guy in there.
Right, it has to be something substantive, like evidence of misconduct or dereliction of duty. And the explanations provided for these 17 firings they were pretty vague and nonspecific.
Yeah, the video mentioned that the administration's line was basically just changing priorities, which doesn't really sound like a legitimate legal justification.
Yeah, that was a major point of contention, and frankly, it seemed like an attempt to circumvent the law and avoid providing real accountability.
And the New York Times even came out and said that these firings likely broke the law.
They did, and there was also a scathing letter from Hannibal Meikware, who was the chairperson of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency.
And what did he say in that letter?
Well, he basically laid out all the ways in which the Trump administration had failed to follow the proper procedures, and he was pretty blunt about it. He said they had violated both the letter and the spirit of the Inspector General Act.
So the IG community was not happy about this at all.
No, not at all, and rightfully so. I mean, it was a direct attack on their independence and their ability to do their jobs effectively.
And the video mentioned that even now, years later, there are still a lot of vacant IG positions or positions being filled by acting appointees.
Yeah, and that's a real problem because it creates a sense of instability and uncertainty, and it can make it harder for IGs to do their work knowing that they might not have the full backing of the administration.
And without a strong IG in place, it becomes a lot harder to hold agencies accountable.
Absolutely. And it can also have a chilling effect on whistleblowers who might be less likely to come forward if they don't trust that their concerns will be taken seriously.
Because IGs are often the ones who protect whistleblowers, right? They provide a safe and confidential channel for reporting wrongdoing.
Exactly. And without that protection, whistleblowers are much more vulnerable to retaliation and harassment.
So these firings, they really had ripple effects throughout the entire system of government accountability.
Oh, absolutely. They raise really serious questions about the rule of law and the separation of powers.
And one of the things that was brought up in the video that I found really interesting was this idea of amending the oath of office for government employees to include a specific commitment to report fraud and corruption.
Yeah, that was a pretty radical proposal, but it was coming from a place of deep concern about the state of ethics in government.
And what do you think about that idea? Is it feasible? Would it make a difference?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's certainly a symbolic gesture, but whether it would actually change behavior is debatable. Some people argue that it would just create more bureaucracy and paperwork.
Right, because you'd have to have some kind of system for processing all those reports.
Exactly. But others argue that it would at least send a strong message that ethical conduct is expected of everyone in government.
And that it's not just the IG's job to police everything, but that everyone has a responsibility to speak up.
Right. It would create a culture of accountability from the bottom up.
It's interesting that you bring up that idea of a culture of accountability because the video also mentioned the irony of the U.S. advocating for anti-corruption measures in other countries like Ukraine while facing these kinds of issues at home.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a case of physician, heal thyself.
Yeah.
You know, we can't be preaching good governance to the rest of the world if we're not holding ourselves to the same standards.
Okay, so what about the fired IGs themselves? Was there any legal recourse for them? Could they sue for wrongful termination?
Well, it's not entirely clear-cut. The law isn't super specific on that point, but some legal experts believe that they might have grounds for a lawsuit.
And what would be the goal of such a lawsuit? Would it be to get their jobs back or to get financial compensation or what?
Well, I think for most of them, it would be more about vindication than anything else, about proving that they were wrongly terminated and clearing their names.
And potentially setting a precedent to make it harder for future administrations to do the same thing.
Exactly, because right now there's not a whole lot of legal protection for IGs who are unjustly fired.
And another concerning thing that the video pointed out was the lack of response from Congress to these firings, particularly from Republicans.
Yeah, that was pretty telling. It seems like there was a reluctance to hold the president accountable, even when there was clear evidence of wrongdoing.
And that lack of oversight from Congress, that's really worrisome because it suggests a breakdown in the system of checks and balances.
Absolutely. And it raises the question of who's really in charge here if the president can just ignore the law and Congress won't do anything about it.
Right. It creates a very dangerous precedent.
And it leads to the possibility of a real constitutional crisis, you know, where the executive branch just starts acting with impunity.
And that's the doomsday scenario.
Yeah.
Right. The one we all hope never happens.
It is, but thankfully we haven't reached that point yet. And the video did offer some glimmers of hope, talking about the many dedicated public servants who are still working to uphold the law and resist corruption.
Right, those points of light, as they were
Well,
called.
exactly. Those are the people who give us reason to believe that the system can still work even in the face of adversity.
And the fact that so few federal employees actually resigned after that fork in the road memo, that's a testament to their commitment.
It is. It shows that there are still plenty of people in government who are willing to stand up for what's right.
Okay, so for our listeners out there, what can they do? What are some concrete actions they can take to support the work of IGs and protect government accountability?
Well, first and foremost, get informed, educate yourselves about the issues, and the players involved know who your representatives are and what their stance is on these matters.
And contact those representatives. Make your voice heard. Let them know that you care about these issues and you expect them to uphold the law.
Absolutely. And support organizations that are working to promote transparency and accountability in government. There are a lot of great groups out there doing really important work.
And be mindful of where you spend your money. Support businesses that have a strong ethical track record and avoid those that engage in shady practices.
Right, because ultimately it's our collective action that can make a difference.
So to wrap up today's deep dive, I think the key takeaway is that inspectors general, they're not just some obscure bureaucratic function. They're an essential part of a functioning democracy.
They're the ones who keep the government honest and accountable.
And when their independence is threatened, it threatens the entire system.
And we all have a role to play in protecting that system.
So here's a final thought for everyone to consider. What does individual responsibility really look like in a society where the rule of law is constantly being tested? How do we ensure that our government remains accountable to the people it serves? That's something to ponder until our next deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening.